Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on whichever part of the world you're in. I'm Iman Umar from the LLF, and it is my honor and privilege to be introducing this session to mark the launch of Courttia Newland's new book, A River Called Time, a speculative dystopian novel written over a period of many years. Set in London, it zooms into an alternate reality where most live in violence, squabble, and disease. Only few inhabit the ark, an enclosure for the elite in the center of the city. This is the very first time Courttia is participating in the Lahore Literary Festival. Now, just to give a brief biography, Courttia Newland is the author of 7 books, including his much lauded debut, The Scholar. His latest novel, The Gospel According to Cain, was published in 2013. He co edited the Penguin Book of New Black Writing in Britain, and his short stories have featured in various anthologies and broadcast on BBC Radio. He was shortlisted for the 2007 CWA Dagger in the Library Award and the 2010 Alfred Fagan Award. In 2016, he was also awarded the Tanner Barbers Award for science fiction writing. As a screenwriter, he has written episodes of Steve McQueen's 2020 BBC series Small Acts. Before I hand it over to the moderator, Varda Dar, I would like to thank the British Council for their partnership and support. So without further ado, you both may begin. I sincerely hope you have a rich interaction.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're well. A very warm welcome to the online edition of the Lahore Literary Festival. Thank you for joining us today. I am Varda Dar, and I am very pleased to be here in conversation with Courttia Newland about his new book, A River Called Time. How are you, Courttia?
I'm good.
Great to have you here. Newland is the author of 7 books. He has been awarded and shortlisted for several literary awards for his work in science fiction and in playwriting. His new book, A River Called Time, which we are discussing today, is a work of speculative fiction, which is set in parallel London. It is now called Dinium, and most people occupy the outer city while the wealthy occupy the Ark, which is an elite enclosure. The novel follows the story of the protagonist, Marcus Denny, who grows up in the outer city, but he happens to win a place inside the Ark. I will ask Courttia to tell us more about the book in a little bit. Thank you for making time for us, Courttia. To begin the conversation, we would really like for you to tell the listeners a little bit about the book without giving away any spoilers, of course.
Yeah, so A River Called Time is a novel set in a parallel world where slavery and colonization never happened. Because this never happened, obviously this has created an alternate history where African cosmology has now become the dominant religion. So things like ancestor worship, the chakras, any kind of spirituality, meditation is completely normal in this world. And also, obviously, lines are not drawn with any regard to race. So it's not like this is a completely utopian society. There are wars. There was a war of light between spiritualists and secularists. But for the most part, people don't, it's not that they don't see race. They just like they take different races and different nation states as completely normal. And there's no denigration of race. There is no white supremacy or any supremacy of any nature. There isn't an alternate black supremacy either. You know, it's just people tend to get along when it comes to race. But the lines that are drawn as you pointed out in your intro, concerning class. So you have the wealthy and the poor, and that's where a lot of the disparity comes from, and that's where a lot of the fighting comes from as well.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Courttia, if we could start with you reading a few passages from the book for us before we dive into specific questions about the book.
Great, no problem. I am going to read from the beginning. I always think that's healthy to read from the beginning because then I don't have to explain so much, and hopefully things will become apparent as I'm reading. I think I'll read 2 to 3 passages. Is that right? Yeah, and then we'll carry on. Sure. Okay. So I'll start from the very beginning. And this is our protagonist, Marcus Denny, who is just finding that he has spontaneous out-of-body experiences that like strike him with no warning, and just without him having any control over them. Void, hum, 360 degrees expansion, pervading known and unknown matter. Breath, existence, him. The first time he was struck by a spontaneous Nambula, Marcus Denny was 8 years old. Feet pushing hard on pedals, body leaning against handlebars, the wheels of the bike ahead glistening with sunlight. His attention was seized, and for a moment he saw the heavens in that shimmering rotation. He couldn't take his eyes away. There was pain in the center of his forehead. He was falling from his bike before he knew it. He must have blacked out, because the next thing he knew, he was lying on the pavement, elbows and knees raw, the bike a resting animal, a yard or so from where he'd fallen. His friends stood over him. Tashari, Karis, Nesta. Marcus let them wrench him to his feet, limping back to his fallen metal steed, waving away their concern, their resistance. He looked pale. Soon they rode in unison again, creaking gears and turning wheels, a random symphony beneath them. They stopped outside rusted gates propped open with fallen masonry. Flakes of orange made the once grand entrance look diseased. Grass and weeds stood as high as their waists. A slight breeze made the strands rustle like a whisper of ghosts. They sat on their bikes, staring at blighted metal, silent. Nesta edged forwards, thin bicycle tire nudging the gate. He rolled over crumbled stones, standing and stamping on the pedals to gain more power until he was over the obstruction, inside. They followed, one after another. Marcus, Karis, and Tashari, the skinniest child, always last, lifting his chin towards graffitied walls, brow arched, fearful. The building was huge. Not compared to the Ark, of course, though it towered above their heads 4 stories high. They rode through warped frames of wooden doors into the main entrance hall, craning their necks to look at the roof. Fallen glass left the dusty brown sky exposed. Their school picture books showed chandeliers and birds wheeling overhead, but the boys saw neither. They got used to being alone, speeding up and down once polished marble floors, performing wheelies and long skids, creating miniature desert storms. When they grew bored, they explored alone. Marcus rode past closed ticket booths and parades of empty shops to the platforms where sleek grand trains once stood. He left his bike against a marble bench and jumped onto the tracks amongst long grass. Some of the weeds were long green strands that looked like wheat. He lay against cool steel, trying to imagine what it must have been like. The olden days. He closed his eyes. So, yeah, I'm going to leave that bit at that point and then move a little further in the book to when Marcus is quite a great deal older and he's won what's called an Excellence Award, which is an award for poor people to be able to live in the Ark. And when you go to the Ark, you stay there forever. You leave behind your family, you leave behind your friends, and you live inside in a city, and you basically never come out again. That's the plan. And so it's a big momentous thing. And I think this has been going on for hundreds of years. This has been going on for maybe, 100, 200 years or so. So by now, it's kind of a thing that a lot of poor people don't really want to do. Even in his childhood, more people wanted to do it at that stage. But, when he gets on board the train is like empty. There's him and one other person, because people don't do it so much because they've realized that, as the slogan goes in the book, inner city is a lie. It's basically a place where the rich live and they live out their fantasies, and poor people who go to live there become like menial workers, or just, they just work in service of the rich, basically. So, and there's poverty and degradation and all the things that were outside you can find inside inner cities. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of disparity inside the Ark as well as outside. And I think that, someone like Marcus would want to be inside there because there's the chance of prestige and the chance of money, even if it's just a dream that you can't find outside in outer city. So he's prepared to go, but he's one of the very few who make that decision. So this is just a little bit from his journey into the Ark, the day he goes. They rose at 8, had breakfast by 9, and by 9:30 the parents and children waited in the lobby, visibly nervous. Shared anxieties broke silence. They spoke, not to make polite conversation, only to reassure themselves everything would be fine. The bland official appeared before them, all smiles and congratulations, annoying catchphrases. They ignored his phony jubilation, letting themselves be led to a small dark car with blackened windows like a hearse. Willow balked. That's Marcus's mum. The official was at her shoulder in an instant, with more smiles, some gentle nudging, and they were in. Doors slammed, twin crunches. The car moved. Everything had been so low-key up until that point. His first sight of the crowds and cameras and protesters had the effect of being punched. Although they were not the thousands that had besieged the station in those early days, the crowd still numbered over 500 and would be rounded up to 8 on that night's evening news. The car slowed. People were on the roads, pavements, signs, rooftops, bus shelters, window ledges, parked cars, anything that could hold their weight. Grateful for tinted windows, Marcus watched people beat fists against the glass in delirium. Beside him, Senior was equally stunned by what he saw. Junior was silent for a time, then suddenly screamed loud, turned beetroot, and apologized immediately. Eventually, all of them dreading the moment, the car came to a gradual halt. Doors opened and there were hands, a forest of them searching as the driver yelled that they should leave the vehicle right now. Senior went first, then Junior, then Marcus himself was pulled into the noise, the colors, the screaming, jeering, shouting, cheering, going off in their ears. Snatches of sentences from hundreds of open mouths. Everything too bright, too noisy. The tinny sound of a band could be heard from somewhere near. The air was a jungle of odors ranging from cigarette and piaro smoke to hot dogs, sulfur, sweet nuts, perfume, frying onions, alcohol, and vomit. Marcus stumbled, turning to see his mother flailing between two rows of Elil masked, black-suited men who formed parallel lines from the car doors and beyond. Long-barreled guns drawn, they held the crowd back, saying nothing other than, "Keep moving, sir, madam. Please keep moving." He shouted to see if Willow was all right. But there was so much noise, his voice was lost, and before he could try again, his eye was caught by one of the larger protest banners, luminous yellow, screaming, "Inner city is a lie. Let them stay." So yeah, I'll stop that one there. And then I'm just going to move on to one last bit, if that's okay. And what I didn't say in my little introduction, this book is very sprawling and huge and quite complicated in a sense. I mean, in the sense that it's dealing with time, obviously a river called time, and it's dealing with, Marcus finds that through him having these tenuous out-of-body experiences, he can travel to parallel times where he can be different versions of himself. So he doesn't travel forward or backwards, he travels to the side. So there are slight different changes. After his first, the first of these different people, and what he is actually, in this parallel, he's a spiritual adept, a teacher, a guru, an advisor, you know, to poor people inside the ark. And so he's a completely different person to the one he was, you know, the person we just saw. And I just wanted to read a slight section from when he's been meditating for like, I think it would be like, you know, 2 hours, 14 hours, something like that. I mean, it's a long time. He's been meditating for a long while. And while that's happened, there's been a riot in his zone. The poor people have rioted, protested against an act of police brutality. And he's woken up. He didn't know that this had happened. He didn't know the riots had happened. He knew the police brutality had happened. And he's walking out into the poor quarter, they call it, this zone, for the first time since he woke up. The walk took them further away from the high street, deep into the quarter, a maze of terrace residencies that mapped their territory, Charlton Estate. An outsider's zone that was clear. Incense belts, sandalwood ghosts. Gardens were filled with squat candles set in the form of their six-pointed star, the centered O. More difficult to see in low light were spray-painted murals. Orishas, gods, deities, angels and symbols adorned every surface. Walls and fences, doors and windows, paving slabs. Prayer flags, symbolic representations of the chakras, crescent moons, triangles, upward swirls. Often no shapes or symbols, only merged formulations of colors. Seamless mosaics of red into orange, Thank you.
So if we could dive into the conversation now, and if you could tell us about the conception of the book. There's so many elements to the book, like you mentioned. How
Mm.
long did it take for you to put all of this together? And
Mhm.
all the themes that you have portrayed in the book, including astral projection and the parallel realities that you've created. What
Mm.
inspired all of these themes and ideas?
I basically felt like I'd had an actual experience of, had an out of body experience. Basically, I felt like that had happened to me not long after I'd written my first book and it was published. And I was like living in a house, rented accommodation. I just moved out of my mum's house, and one night I felt like I'd had an out of body experience. I felt like I'd seen my own body um, underneath me on the bed as I was sleeping. I'd had these bouts of, like, I think they call it narcolepsy, where I couldn't breathe, I couldn't see, all of these things were, it felt like there was pressure on my chest throughout my life. It always happened, but I'd always fought against it, and I struggled and I woke up. And this time I didn't struggle. This time I kind of relaxed into it, and that's what happened. So my first thought was, wow, I wonder if that was an out of body experience, because I saw my own body lying on the bed. And then my second thought was, that'd be amazing to write about. So from that point onwards, I started to try and do research on astral projection and what people believed. And also that led me to African cosmology. I found this was quite a huge part of African cosmology, this belief that you could travel to spiritual world. I mean, I knew it in a sense. I knew that we had spiritual beliefs, and that we have many different beliefs in the Caribbean, which is where I'm from. We have a belief in Obia and voodoo, which has been much maligned in Western culture as being evil and bad and dealing with like kind of devil worship. But it's not actually, that's not what it is. It's just a kind of worship of the land and a belief in ancestral worship. And as I delved more into that kind of spirituality, the storylines of the book started to unfurl.
So it was quite fascinating. You refer to African cosmology. I was unfamiliar with it, and while reading the book, I kind of found myself Googling African cosmology. So that's always the sign of an excellent book. So, Courttia, you mentioned that you explored all these themes. Another interesting theme that you immediately pick up on when you start reading the book is the elimination of colonialism and slavery from the historical timeline that you present at the beginning of the book. So my question essentially is in two parts. Why was it important for the purpose of the novel to remove these two elements? And two, the society that you have created as a result is not, and you touched upon this as well initially, that it's not ideal as far as social justice or equality are concerned. So what were you attempting to explore by building that narrative?
Yeah. So I mean, I came at the African cosmology part, as I was just saying, like secondary to the part that I wanted to write astral projection. As I did more research, and I found this was such a huge staple of our cosmological systems. I mean, obviously they were very different in different nation states. They were like, we went from one place to another place, and different nations in the African continent would deal with these things in a slightly different way, but they all had fundamentally the same basis. And I was struck by those correlations. I was struck by, okay, so here you will call a deity this name, and then here you will call it another name. And in the diaspora, the African diaspora in the Caribbean, we have another name for it, but it's basically essentially the same people. So I started to pull those things together. I'd also always been interested in, pre-colonial Africa. I'd always had that in the back of my mind. Wouldn't it be great to write a book about pre-colonial Africa? And I'd thought about it for a long time, and then realized that I knew nothing about that, having been born in the UK and been from the Caribbean. So as most writers do in this, when this kind of thing happens, you think, okay, so I can't do that. What can I do? What can play to my own strengths? And I realized that if I could take those themes and take those motifs and move them to London, that would make it easier for me to deal with. And sorry, I forgot your second question. The second part of your question.
The second part of the question was, why is the society that you've created, which is where colonialism and slavery did not happen, it still has, it's not significantly better in terms of justice and equality. So what sort of human behavior were you trying to explore by through that narrative?
I've seen in the societies where race wasn't dominant, this kind of like race hierarchy wasn't dominant, class then tended to take over. And I very much wanted to talk about class, you know, I wanted to have a book where, you know, I felt like, you know, we are talking about race in a sense, but we're talking about race by the removal of identity politics, you know, by rather than placing it at the forefront, you know. I wanted to look at the same thing from a slightly different angle. So I kind of liken it to when you're trying to find an allergy, right? You're trying to find, like, a doctor might try and find what ails you, and they remove things rather than saying, okay, just continue as you are. They say, okay, if you take away this food and you take away that food, you take away that food, then let's see, we'll start to reintroduce them slowly. Let's see what it is that causes your issue, causes your hurt. So I wanted to look at race from that angle. If we removed race, we might be able to better look at race, you know. And I don't want to give any spoilers as to what that means in the book, but there's a huge section of the book where it's reintroduced, let's say, and then we can really look at that in a very interesting and almost completely new perspective, because previously, you know, we weren't looking at the world in that way.
That's a very interesting approach to take in the book. So Courttia, I would like to talk about the character development a little bit, and how much of your writing are inspired by your own experiences.
I think there's quite a lot of my own experiences in there. I mean, I think in a way, and I haven't really delved too deeply into this because I don't like to do that when I'm writing the book and I've not long finished it or sent it out into the world. I think Marcus is representative of my own experiences of being from a working class background and then entering the world of books and literature and publishing, all of those things, which isn't very representative of the working classes. Let's just say that. So I think I was using Marcus in a way as an allegory for my own dilemma. I mean, I used to teach creative writing, and I always say that, you know, people say that poets are talking about themselves and novelists are talking about other people, but I've always thought that's rubbish. I think novelists are essentially talking about ourselves and what concerns us just as much as poets, you know, and I embrace that, actually. So yeah, there's lots of parallels with Marcus and the way that he grew up and the way that I grew up. It's the same area. It's West London. You know, he goes to a school which is quite similar to my school. He's got the rucksack on his back and he's into, like, you know, song lyrics and MCing. He wants to become a writer. You know, all of these things are drawn from my life. And I think that one of my friends read like an early draft of the book, and when she got to the bit about the rucksack on my back, and she's like, "That's you. You're just talking about yourself, right?" And I was like, I had to hold my hands up.
So since we're talking about writing and about your life, so this brings me to another question pertaining to the past year. So as a writer, you know, generally there are two groups of people, writers who describe being in lockdown as their natural state of being. And then there are others who say writing is actually inspired by people, through observation, of people, of places, of human behavior. So the pandemic and the past year has not exactly been conducive in terms of creativity. So which group do you relate to the most?
Like everything, I'm like an amalgamation of two groups, actually. I think that's very, very true. I'm very much a social animal, you know, in the sense that I like being around people. I'm not this literary writer, but I think also at the same time, when it comes to knuckle down and be in my house, I'm quite good at that. You know, I've always been quite good at just saying, okay, I'm going to cut all that stuff out. It was the first lesson I learned, you know, when I wrote The Scholar. I had my friends phoning me up and saying, "Oh, come to this party or come to this club." And I'd be like, no, I'm going to have to stay indoors and write. And I've stuck to that ever since. So I've not minded it, to be honest, because I do feel like it's my state of being to be indoors for like months on end. And I've had enough work to keep me busy. And I'm lucky enough in that regard. And usually when I have a book published, I have a huge launch party. I have like DJs and I have like other writers will come and they'll perform and we'll go off into the night and it'll be a whole celebration. And obviously I can't do that. So it's a little bit sad because I felt like, oh, I really want to do that. But we've basically postponed that party until whenever lockdown ends. And as soon as lockdown ends and we're all safe and we can gather in a room together, we're going to have that party. Definitely.
Definitely. Courttia, so since we're talking about the past year, and whether you look at it from the lens of pandemic or from the lens of the social justice movements that we had the past year, so do you feel that all of this has changed the way you approach writing and the stories that you think are important to tell, and to tell in the mainstream?
Yes. No, I don't actually. I mean, it's really interesting when I look at A River Called Time, and I think I started it in 2002, and so many of the issues that I talk about in A River Called Time is pertinent to now. You know, I mean, I've written people who are wearing face masks. You know, I mean, we're talking about, you know, the plight of menial workers. You know, I mean, if those things aren't like endemic to where we are now, I don't know what is. So I feel like I'm always going to be chronicling what's going on, and unfortunately, until things change, what I'm writing about is always going to be relevant. It's going to be circular in nature, and we talk about these things 18 years ago, and they're going to still be relevant now, which is a huge shame, I think.
Absolutely. So Courttia, we're coming towards the end of our session. Before we close, I would like to ask you, for the benefit of aspiring writers everywhere, about the best piece of advice that you've received about writing and that you would like to share with us.
Oh man, the best piece of advice I've heard about writing is really simple, actually, which is just like, do the work. That's it. Do the work.
Absolutely. I think that's excellent advice. And on that note, we will close this session. Thank you so much, Courttia, for taking time to speak to us.